Thank you very much, Jeffrey and Jeff. Thanks for all of you for coming out here. It's a pleasure to be in Victoria, Texas. I thought I might first talk about my experiences as an Asian American author and then read a little bit from Lonesome Lies Before Us. As Jeffrey talked about, quite a bit of my fiction has been concerned with race and identity. Paradoxically, the more I have tried to resist being pigeonholed as an ethnic writer, the more I have been the recipient of that label. And my ambivalence as an Asian American, both as a writer and as a citizen, has become an enduring subject of my work. But before we get into all of that, I should say that my career got off to a late start. After I received my MFA from Emerson College in Boston, I taught 8 classes a year as an adjunct and was also working part-time at the literary magazine Plowshares, where I would eventually become the editor. I wasn't getting much writing done. Then Plowshares got a series of large grants, and the journal began to consume my life. Over the next decade, I'd write a story every year or so just to keep my hand in, and I'd get them published in magazines, but I never put a book together. I called myself a writer, but I wasn't really writing. Finally, when I was 38, I decided I didn't want to end up thinking coulda, woulda, shoulda. Either I was going to lay it all out on the line, or I would shut up about it. I committed myself to writing some new stories and revising the old ones and doing my damnedest to publish a collection. The question was, though, what kind of stories? What kind of collection? When I was an MFA student, I'd been told more than once that I should write about the Asian American experience and have predominantly Asian American characters. I thought the suggestion was, in and of itself, racist, that I was being told I shouldn't step out of the ethnic literature box, that I should know my place. I wasn't interested in writing about being an immigrant or setting stories into old Asia. I had no connection to those stories. They weren't my stories. So essentially, my internal reaction to that suggestion was, fuck you. I thought I should be able to write whatever I wanted to write. And the ethnicity of my characters is immaterial. Thus, my characters in grad school were often racially unspecified or white. But I had to acknowledge that race did matter to me, that I had faced racism, especially in Boston, and that tapping into my anger and confusion and discomfort with the issue of race could be powerful and generative. My sense of identity had always been complicated. I was born a third-generation Korean American in Tokyo to a father who worked in the U.S. State Department. Nearly my entire childhood we shuttled back and forth between Japan and Korea, and I did not feel I belonged anywhere. Thus, seemingly innocuous questions, where are you from? What are you? What's your nationality instead of ethnicity? Were extremely awkward for me. They'd made me feel excluded, exoticized, alien, other, not a real American. These days, those types of questions are called microaggressions. I'm sure they had something to do with my switching majors at UCLA from engineering to English. Maybe a part of me wanted to avoid those awful stereotypes about Asian Americans that have endured for decades. Here's a video that illustrates some of those stereotypes, only in reverse.
Hey, so where are you from again? Tennessee. No, where are you really from?
How do you eat with a working man? It's so hard. I could never do that. Your English is great. Were you adopted?
So how come you only hang out with other white people?
You must be really good at that.
Come on, guys. Don't you have trouble telling white people apart? Like, I can't tell you guys apart.
I'm white.
You're so unlucky you're white because your people are just naturally fat.
Do you have a normal name too, or just your white name? Are your parents like super white?
Hey, do you watch How I Met Your Mother? I'm so into white culture.
I love white accents. Hey, I ate cheese.
You know, I've been really into Western religions lately. Like, I love how they're so angry and uptight, you know? I decorated my whole house in crosses. Who's hungry?
You're Italian? I love pasta. A pizza bag. A pizza bag. Your parents must have been super not strict. Did you just do whatever you wanted? Oh my god, 2 forks? That would look totally cute in my hair. I just love dating white guys because they're so large and overbearing.
Hey, you're really into white girls. Just white girls. Hey, where you going? Come on. Come on, I bet you're really opinionated. Probably a little dumb.
I have like brown eyes, so I'm practically white.
Those were some of the stereotypes I was trying to circumvent. As I was putting together the stories for the collection, though, I had to concede that the book would be tighter if it had largely Asian American characters, but with a caveat. I didn't want to make a big deal about their being Asian American. The characters were regular people, and with 2 exceptions, they populated regular stories, not polemics about race. Weirdly, this was considered somewhat revolutionary, which shows you how endemic that ethnic literature box had been back then. I sold that first book, The Collection Yellow, to W.W. Norton the week of my 40th birthday, which had been my goal. I went to New York to meet my editor, Elaine Mason. We got around to discussing the publication date for the book, and Elaine suggested the fall. I pressed for spring. I didn't want to wait any longer than I had to for its release. I thought some marketing savvy might sway her, so I reminded her that May was Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Well, she said, we're not planning to push your collection as an Asian American book. We're simply going to market it as the debut of a great new literary voice. But I knew that whatever we did, no matter how the book was packaged or designed, regardless of what the flap copy proclaimed or the press release said, the book would be received and qualified as an Asian American book. The market for books of literary fiction, especially short story collections, was and still is challenging. Even with the best of intentions, publishers have a hard time figuring out how to sell them, and the media has an even more difficult time figuring out how to review them. Reporters and interviewers need some sort of a hook, a human interest angle, with which to approach an author and work, and the race card is often the easiest, sexiest one available. This was borne out with the proposed covers for my book, one of which showed the back of an Asian man's head. I thought this was very strange until I realized this was a trope, as you can see when looking at a bunch of covers for Asian American writers. Here they've eliminated the head entirely and just use a braid. There are some other common motifs. Origami. Butterflies. Cherry blossoms. The color red is also big. And then there are the obligatory dragons. And little shoes. And traditional dresses with little shoes. And ornaments with cherry blossoms. And fans. Publishers really seem to like fans. Or better yet, fans with cherry blossoms. But designers really seem to love one particular trope. I call it the partial Asian face, as you see here, combined with the requisite fan and traditional dress. The faces are often blurred, and feature almond-shaped eyes. So let me show you the cover I got for my first book. That's right, the partial blurred Asian face. Of course, this was partially my fault. I had named the book Yellow, after all, which came across to some people as brazenly political, in your face. Yet to me, the title had as much to do with the characters' emotional fears as their ethnicity. The stories were about cowardice and paralysis, the inability to unshackle oneself from doubt, the lacerating need for approval. They were about people who were too afraid to live their lives. Predictably, when I was interviewed about Yellow, I was asked questions about the Asian diaspora, about Asian American literature, trends, histories, demographics, divisions, hardly anything about the short stories themselves. These questions made me very uncomfortable. I'd hem and haw, I'd deflect and defer, but the questions kept returning and I kept on being asked to make generalizations about the Asian American experience. My next book was a novel called Country of Origin, and this was the cover for it. Yep, sorry to say, another half-blurred Asian face. My next novel was called Wrack and Ruin. I made damn sure there was not going to be another half-blurred Asian face. My fourth book was called The Collective. Let me first show you the last iterations of the cover in the design phase. You see the chopsticks and the calligraphy brush? There's a distinctly oriental feel to this. Here's the final version after I've made a lot of complaints. It's subtle, but it makes a huge difference, doesn't it? Removing those chopsticks and the brush. As writers of color, what are our responsibilities? Obviously, I wrestle a lot with this issue, as do many Asian American writers, especially emerging ones, who ask, must Asian American artists always have race as their primary subject? Do we always have to make our characters Asian American? If we don't, is it tantamount to some sort of race betrayal? Doesn't limiting yourself to race ghettoize yourself or even perpetuate stereotypes? I think most Asian American authors are tired of the standard stories about discrimination and assimilation, or those set in the ancient hinterlands of our countries of ethnic origin, stories that evoke fans and cherry blossoms and dragons. Those stories are no longer pertinent or urgent to most of us. Of course, we have not yet entered into a post-racial era, far from it, and bigotry rages on, but it's not something people want to explore or dramatize in every single story, essay, or poem, although they should feel perfectly free to do so if it calls to them. I think we will get to the point where we, as writers of color, will be able to slip away from writing about identity and move to whatever captures our fancy. We'll be able to have characters of color and not have it be the first thing that's mentioned. This was the cover for my latest novel, Lonesome Lies Before Us. This time around, I didn't have to ask my publisher to remove or avoid anything. So maybe they finally got around to understanding me. Or it could have been because in this book, I was trying to do something quietly subversive. The central characters are working-class Asian Americans, and many secondary characters are Latino American, and a few other characters are African American, yet no character is identified by his or her race or ethnicity. Ostensibly, this is a novel that explores class more than race. However, the adumbrations of racial issues are there, perhaps more so because they're not explicitly referenced. I distinctly remember on my first book tour, a young man came up to me after a reading. He said, "You know, I'm Korean American and I want to be a writer too, but my question to you is, do I have to write about being Korean American?" And I said to him, "No, because hopefully I'm doing that for you." My reply was only partially in jest. Race and identity have been my calling card, and they've occasionally given me a vehicle with which to write, but they are not the only or real subjects I write about. I think I write about the fears common to us all. I write about loneliness, I write about love, I write about loss. All of us at some point in our lives, for one reason or another, whether we're Asian or Black or Latino or white, whether we're poor or ugly or rich or blessed, feel alienated. We all feel like outsiders sometime or another, and we all feel in the dark hours of the soul like we don't belong anywhere. That's what I write about. That's why I write fiction. Because I'm fascinated by people's lives, the arc of them, their hopes and dreams and the twists of fate and fortune that befall them, that determine how they will turn out, often in the most unexpected ways. I'm going to read now from Lonesome Lies Before Us, which, as you can tell from the cover, is about a musician, specifically an alt-country musician. If you're unfamiliar with the term, alt-country, it combines rock, folk, and country, an alternative to Nashville. Think Wilco, Lucinda Williams, Ryan Adams, Jason Isbell. It's more commonly referred to as Americana or roots music now. One problem, a big problem I had in writing this book is I am not a musician. I play a little bad guitar, but that's about it. And so I ended up having to insert snippets of 3 songs into the novel, and they were the first lyrics I'd attempted, and they were god-awful. So I decided I needed to enlist the help of a professional. I cold emailed Will Johnson, the frontman for the band Centromatic. He lives in Austin, actually. I asked if he'd be open at all to trying to fix my lyrics. Actually, I never thought he'd reply, so I was thrilled when he did, and even more delighted with what he did to transform my bad lyrics, which originally for one song was this. And here's what Will Johnson did to them. He added an entirely new second verse. The other changes are more subtle, but they make a huge difference, right? Here's Will singing the song. He recorded this on his iPhone in the bathroom of a motel room when he was out on tour.
Lonesome lies before us, whatever place we're in. We search this world for no reason, finish it never end. The distance always opens us and what it was to be free. The distance always showed us our own train. Another shame that I miss you. I have got my same old sin. I look for you in all the spaces out away. Wish we
Really cool, right? So getting back to the book, the novel's about a singer-songwriter named Yadin Park who never quite made it. It didn't help that he was quite homely and had terrible stage fright. So I'm going to read a section that's a flashback to the time when Yadin and his former lover Mallory were in their early 20s in Raleigh, North Carolina. They met in Raleigh in the late 1980s. Yadin had been kicking around the Triangle for several years by then, bussing tables and washing dishes at the Rathskeller and the Circus Family restaurant and doing construction work to support himself. All the while, he was trying to sharpen his guitar skills and write songs. He went to dive bars up and down Hillsborough Street to listen to music, and along the way befriended other aspiring musicians. There was a lot of talk then that Raleigh and Chapel Hill would be the next Seattle, a hotbed for new grunge acts. Punk bands like Superchunk abounded, but the Triangle would soon become more famous as the breeding ground for all country groups like Whiskey Town. Yadin was there for the first intimations of the genre, and gradually he found his affinity sliding from noise rock to alt country. Nearly every free night, he participated in informal jam sessions at people's houses and apartments. One coterie in Raleigh called themselves the Siesta Club. They drink cans of beer and grill burgers and hot dogs and get stoned and play horseshoes until the sun set, then sit on the porch or around the kitchen table and strum guitars, mandolins, and banjos and sing. They do covers, but more and more they challenge each other to present their own compositions. The Yadin was too shy ever to take a turn with one of his songs. It was only after Mallory began showing up to the sessions that he collected the courage to perform one. He had seen her around and desperately wanted to impress her. She was a double major in music and drama at NC State and worked as a clerk at School Kids, the record store in Hillsborough across the street from the campus bell tower. A frequent browser at the store, Yadin had overheard her talking to customers, and her knowledge of music, all kinds of music, her references and technical insights, had staggered him. She had learned the viola through the Suzuki method and had taken up country fiddle for fun. A multi-instrumentalist, she was better at guitar than Yadin at that age. Yet it was her fiddle that made the Siesta Club sessions soar. She had a wonderful voice, too, a sweet, ethereal keening. Yadin waited for a night with a smaller turnout. At last, one rainy evening at a house in 5 Points, just 6 of them in attendance, he took out a crumpled napkin and sitting on an ottoman, laid it on his denimed right knee. "Key of G," he said to the others. "It's 1654. He was a bit chagrined. 1654 was one of the most banal, hackneyed chord progressions in music. Chorus is 541. He started strumming his guitar. He was trembling, and the napkin on his knee fell to the floor. He left it there, toeing it with his boot so it was readable. He sang the first verse, playing G, E minor, D, C. "We weep for lost youth, and we weep for lost love. We weep for old memories and fallen stars." Tediously, every line in the song contained the phrase, "we weep." Even the chorus, with slightly harder strums for D, C, G. "Oh, we weep. All we can do is weep." It was verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, no bridge, not long enough. Dull and unimaginative. He did a quick outro, picked up the napkin, and stuffed it into his back pocket. He never looked up once during the song. He still didn't. The others in the room clapped politely. "That was nice," he heard someone say. A girl, Mallory. They didn't speak that night, not for several days until he walked into School Kids. He had been coming to the record store every afternoon, waiting for her to be behind the counter again. "Hey, there he is, Mr. Forlorn," she said. "I hope you're not still weeping." He felt his face warm. I know, it was a piece of shit, that song. Not a piece of shit. The lyrics could use a little variation, maybe. But I liked it. a lot. You have something. What do I have? Yadin asked. I'm not going to tell you yet, Mallory said. Maybe I never will. It'd give you a big head. Anyway, it's intangible and ineffable. Ow. He made a mental note to look up ineffable in the dictionary. 2-line chorus, she said. Ever heard of Blaze Foley? Picture cards can't picture you? Blaze Foley, a good friend of Townes Van Zant's, was one of the singer-songwriters he revered the most. Like Yadin's song, Picture Cards had a 2-line chorus, but it was actually the same line repeated. I saw daylight in your eyes, Yadin sang quietly, and Mallory joined him for the second utterance, going high to his low. Without trying, they had melded in beautiful harmony. What are you doing later? She asked. Want to get a drink? They began singing together, just the two of them in her apartment, playing guitar and fiddle. Straight away, they had a special vocal chemistry. They never had to spell the arrangements in advance. It was as if they were having a conversation they'd had all their lives. They'd exchange a look or a nod, and they'd go up an octave, ascending together in perfect pitch. She helped Yadin hone his songs, his lyrics. You can be vague in a verse, but never in a chorus, she told him. And audiences like to anticipate rhymes, trying to guess them. There's comfort when they do, but they also like to be surprised once in a while. And it can't be buckets of tears down by the muddy river all the time. You need to avoid those kinds of cliches like the plague, she laughed. So to speak, get it? He didn't. You need some originality, some complexity. She taught him about music theory and song structure. She had him listen over and over to Down by the River, Cowgirl in the Sand, and Cinnamon Girl, all three of which Neil Young wrote in a single day. You hear that, she said, as Cinnamon Girl spun on the turntable, alternating 4 on the floor. How brilliant is that? The riffs and double drop D, the minor 7th harmony, and no chorus, just a middle 8. They began performing duets at the Siesta Club jam sessions. They'd stare into each other's eyes and sing, a blissful, swooning collusion. After one session, a guy named Ross said to Yadin, why don't you guys just get a room already? The two of you are practically having sex up there doing those songs. Yadin was 22 and a virgin. He'd only made out with a few girls. Once he'd almost had intercourse, although he was fairly certain it had been an accident. That in the dark basement of a party, the girl who had thrown herself on him, Plowed, had thought he was someone else. As a teenager, he'd had bad acne, and even now, as a putative adult, he had yet to completely outgrow it, still getting occasional cysts. Sometimes he could stave them off by wrapping an ice cube in a paper towel and pressing it against the nodule 20 minutes at a time. Once in a while, though, it'd keep growing and swell into a massive pus-filled lesion. He would have to perform surgery. He'd sterilize a sewing needle with a lighter and lodge it into the cyst until it pierced the underlining abscess. Then he would pinch and squash and mash it between his fingers, often leaving a huge boil and scab. He would affix Band-Aids to his face and lie that he had walked into a tree branch or collided against the corner of a cupboard door. Ross had access to a house on the Outer Banks. Owned by his parents' friends, it was in the town of Avon on Hatteras Island, a 4-hour drive from Raleigh, and invited whoever was able to come one October weekend. There ended up to be 9 of them, piled into 2 cars. The 3-story sound front house was built on stilts and nicely appointed, with a wraparound deck and a hot tub on the 2nd floor. In all, there were 4 bedrooms. The couples got their own rooms, and Mallory and another girl took dibs on the master. Ross and a fellow named Thornton agreed to share the room with 2 twin beds, which left Yadin to sleep on one of the sofa beds in the living room. He didn't complain. Agonizingly, he felt a cyst emerging underneath his right cheek. Such rotten, predictable timing, and he would likely have to do a few surgical procedures during the middle of the night. The days were still relatively warm in the 70s, and most of the group went swimming on the ocean side of the barrier island. Yadin and Mallory were too bashful to expose themselves in bathing suits. They sat on lounge chairs on the deck of the house, fully clothed, smoking cigarettes and talking, looking out at Pamlico Sound, enjoying the sun and water and sky in each other's company. He had never felt so relaxed. Late into the night, they played music in various ensembles. For Yadin's work, one lineup was particularly sharp: Ross on bass, Charlie on drums, and Thornton on lead guitar, running off riffs on his dobro, with Yadin playing rhythm. Combined with Mallory on the fiddle, they brought Yadin's songs to life. Thankfully, he was able to ward off the cyst, applying ice cubes throughout the first night to his cheek. On the second night, he was dead asleep on the lumpy sofa bed when Mallory joined him under the covers. "Wake up, Yadin, wake up," she whispered. You ever hear the story about how Graham Parsons stole David Crosby's fiancée? Her name was Nancy, a knockout by all accounts. She was living with Crosby in L.A., engaged to be married to him in 3 weeks, but someone brought Graham over for a drink. He was smitten. He knew Crosby was leaving that afternoon to go on tour with the Byrds. So he came back to the house that very same night, knocked on the door, and when Nancy answered, he told her, "I've been looking for you my whole life, and I'm taking you with me." Yadin, it's been months now. I've been waiting for you to take me, but I'm tired of waiting, so I am going to take you. Thank you.